Just before I get into the video, I have also written an article based on this topic, and it goes over a couple of things that I haven't actually covered in this video. So if you want to go ahead and read that, I will link it down in the description so you can go straight to it. So now getting onto the video, as we all know, in the past month or so, Manchester City really have fallen off since they lost their star man Rodri, and overall I was not expecting it to be this bad. What I really was expecting was for Man City to kind of struggle a bit more. Maybe they'll struggle to beat some of those lower ranked teams, and maybe they'll struggle to beat some of the top teams, but I did think that they would continue being not as good but kind of just as good as they were. So multiple things really seem to have changed with Man City, and the big thing is that their defense does not seem to be as reliable as it once was. They are conceding a lot more goals, and they also aren't creating as many clear chances, which I do think can be linked back to their defense not being as reliable, because then obviously things have to change, so they're not conceding as many goals, and because of this they can't seem to finish their chances as well, and this could really be down to a morale thing or just a general confidence thing overall. So Rodri went down in the 2-2 draw at Arsenal, and really since this the team really hasn't got back to where they were at that point. And as we all know, on October the 28th Rodri was actually awarded the Ballon d'Or, so Man City have arguably lost the best player in the world, and their team honestly has just fallen apart ever since then. However, the first few games after losing Rodri, Man City are actually doing quite well, so they ended up beating Watford 2-1, then they drew with Newcastle 1-1, then they beat Slovan Bratislava 4-0, then they went on to beat Fulham 3-2, beat Wolves 2-1, beat Sparta Prague 5-0, and then they beat Southampton 1-0. So they, after losing Rodri, they went through the next 7 games unbeaten, winning 6 and just drawing that 1 game with Newcastle. However, I do think here you need to look at the teams that they were against, because a lot of these teams were lower ranked teams, and then in the Champions League they weren't really facing the best teams. And when they beat Watford 2-1, that was in a cup game, and I'm pretty sure Watford are in the Championship. So these next 7 games weren't really the biggest test, except the game with Newcastle, which they drew 1-1. So I think you can kind of look at that and say, yeah, I mean, they were expected to beat these teams, and you would expect that they would have beaten some of these teams a bit more comfortably, and yet they were against teams that they would be expected to beat very, very comfortably, and for it to not really be much of a challenge. However, they didn't win a lot of these games convincingly, like for example Watford 2-1, Wolves 2-1 and Southampton 1-0. You would expect them to win these games by 2-3 goals maybe, and I think that this could have really have acted as a warning as to what was going to come next, because they weren't putting these teams away convincingly, and they were consistently really conceding 1 goal a game, and then obviously conceding the 2 to Fulham. That could have really have acted as a precursor as to what was going to happen when they were going to go in their next 6-7 games, purely because they were going to have a string of games against against much better opponents. And like I said, this probably acted as a bit of a warning, and so now when they went on to play their next few games, they would go on a massive 5-game losing streak. So here they would end up losing 2-1 to Tottenham, then they would get absolutely thumped 4-1 by Sporting Lisbon, then they would go on to lose 2-1 to Brighton, then they would face Tottenham again, but this time they would get once again thumped, this time 4-0 in the Premier League. They would then break this losing streak with a 3-3 draw with Feyenoord in the Champions League, and most recently they lost 2-0 to Liverpool. So just a couple of interesting things about these losses that kind of stood out to me. 4 out of 5 of these losses were away, so this kind of new Man City team without Rodri clearly can't play away, and I do think that this will come back to the atmospheric pressure of playing away due to the fans not being on your side and the fans really kind of getting on top of your players and of your team. So that can sometimes have a strange sort of psychological morale type of effect. So you probably aren't as effective away as you are at home because you don't have that support. And the other interesting fact that I found was 4 of the 5 losses, Man City at some point in the game were playing from behind, and a lot of those games they were playing from behind, not straight away, but they were conceding the first goal. So I think that that is another telling thing, because when you're playing from behind you have to take risks that can open you up at the back, because you need to really push more people forward to try and break the defence down quicker. And alongside that, when teams go up against Man City, they do tend to sit back a bit more, so pushing more players forward when you're trying to break down the defence, it's like you're leaving yourself open to attack. And Man City's defence has really been a lot more vulnerable than it usually would be in the last month or so. So really, I think here the big problem was that Rodri was kind of acting like an anchor in that midfield, and he would give an extra player in defence, so he would act as an extra player to go back and defend, and he was very good at that. So this gives the defence an extra player, so it's kind of like they weren't playing 4 at the back, it was more like they were playing 5 at the back, but that other defender, Rodri, was a bit more forward, if that makes any sense. And this is a very, very good booster for the defence for a few reasons. Firstly, because it makes them harder to break down if they've got that extra defensive player who can actually do a good defensive job. So the other teams that are going forward against them might have to push an extra player or 2 forward to try and break down that defence, which then leaves them vulnerable at the back. And also, for example, if a defender is beaten and then another defensive player has to come across, cover that player, Rodri can kind of like sit back in that defender's position. So if a defender is out of position for any reason, there could be many reasons that a defender is out of position, Rodri could kind of like fill in that gap, and he could do that role very reliably because he is more of a defensive midfielder. So obviously without Rodri in the lineup, they don't really have that extra defender that they can like slot in that defensive midfield role. I mean, Man City do have some very good midfielders, but they're not really defensively orientated. They're more either neutral or they're more attacking midfielders. So they don't have that extra player to put in defence, and then when a defender is out of position, they are really badly out of position, and then also you'll see gaps appearing at the back after this. So really, I think that another thing that this has done is it's potentially exposed some weaknesses in Man City's defence that may not have been there before. For example, when they're out of position, there's going to be more gaps at the back, and obviously teams like Liverpool, teams like Tottenham are going to attack that a lot more, and then it makes Man City look a lot more vulnerable. So obviously without this, the defence can easily be all over the place for Man City, and I think we have seen that at times. So I think going forward, Man City are going to have to bring in a defensive-minded midfielder in the transfer window, because obviously Rodri is out for the season. And I do think it will be interesting to see what happens going forward, especially with the Christmas schedule coming up, where it's a lot more compact. I think it will be interesting to see how Man City deal with that, and then what they do in the transfer window. So those are basically my thoughts, plus what has happened to Man City in the past month or so since losing Rodri. Let me know what you think about this down in the comments. What do you think about Man City overall? And also, do you think their title challenge is over? So leave all that down in the comments. If you like this video, leave a like. And if you also like the video, consider subscribing to the channel. So yeah, thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next one.